Good morning, boys and girls. Welcome to language lesson 152. We are going to begin with our oral language exercises. Then we're going to transition into a review of the previous concept that was introduced. We're going to move into a new one and then end with our think skills practice. Remember to simply repeat after me once you hear the sentence. How many boys swam here yesterday? Tom must have swum 40 laps today. Jill swam until she was exhausted. Who began this project? Have you begun your project yet? Tom should have begun his by now. Who proved to Tom that his plan would work? Has he proved his theory yet? Do you know how this can be proved? Who finally proved you right? Okay, very good. Now, in the previous class, we basically went over the fact that subjects and verbs, must agree in number. A singular subject agrees with a singular verb, and a plural subject agrees with a plural verb. Now, we also emphasized the fact that most singular verbs end with an S. That's very important for you to remember. So what we're going to do, we're going to practice using some subjects randomly. We're going to basically decide whether or not it should be accompanied with a singular verb or a plural verb. All right, so here goes an example. If I were to give you the subject you, for instance, would you tell me you are, you is, or you was, or were? You need to think to yourself, okay? Now, basically, if you listened, you would determine that you are is more appropriate. However, if you remember from our previous class, we said that the pronoun you is always accompanied with a plural verb. So in this case, it would be you are or you were, because we know that the verbs are and were are plural, and the verbs is and was is singular. Let's move on to another example. Books. So you should realize that books is already pluralized. It ends with an S. So now you need to you should think to yourself, books is or books are. In this case, it would be books are. It needs to be accompanied with a plural verb. What if I were to say story? Absolutely, it would be story is. All right, how about shoes? That's a plural subject. Yes, shoes are. And girls? You're thinking to yourself, this is becoming easy, good. So girls are. What if I were to give you the subject it? It is or it are? Yes, it is correct. All right, keys. Keys are. The plural subject needs to be accompanied with the plural verb. Let's do two more examples and then move into our new concept for today. Babies. Babies is or babies are? Babies are. Very good. And finally, brother. Brother is. You recognized that the subject was singular, so therefore it needs a singular verb. And you can practice later on by returning to this slide just to ensure that you have the concept down packed. Okay, so Today, I want you to consider a number of things, but let's begin with this. First and foremost, if you were to encounter a sentence with a prepositional phrase, I want you to remember that a subject or verb is never found in a prepositional phrase. I'm going to say that again. A subject or verb will never be found in a prepositional phrase. Okay, so the verb must agree with the subject, not with the prepositional phrase. That prepositional phrase can sometimes be very tricky, so it can make the sentence more complex. So what should you do in this particular case? I have an example directly below. It says the sound of many voices was or were heard. Now, this is what I'd like for you to do. In the previous lesson, we asked you to identify the subject first. Not so in this case. In this case, you want to identify your prepositional phrase first, and once you've done so, you're going to want to cross that out. Once you have identified the prepositional phrase and eliminated it from the sentence, you are then going to locate your subject. And based on what that subject is, whether it's singular or plural, you'll then be able to identify the correct verb. All right. So now, if you look in the sentence, once again, the sound of many voices was or were heard. You should have identified of many voices as your prepositional phrase. So we would cross that out. And then we'd ask ourselves, well, then, what is the subject? The subject in this sentence is sound. So is sound singular or is sound plural? If you said singular, you are correct. So then now we would need to ensure it has a singular verb. So the sound was heard. Very good. The clue there is that was ended in an S. Now let's go ahead and look on the next slide as to what it should look like on paper. So again, the verb must agree with the subject, not the prepositional phrase. We identified that the subject was singular in this case, and so it needed a singular verb. And that's why you notice that the verb was underlined twice. Okay, so the steps once again to follow is you mark out your prepositional phrases, you find the subject, you decide whether or not the subject is singular or plural, and then you choose the matching or agreeable verb. Go ahead and direct your attention to page 233. And we are going to look at Think A together, and you'll notice the very first one is the actual example we just did. But before moving forward, let's read the Think closely. Sometimes a prepositional phrase comes between the subject and the verb in the sentence. Do not let this confuse you. The verb must still agree with the subject, not the object of the preposition. So it's asking you first and foremost to draw one line through each prepositional phrase in the sentences below. Then it's asking you to circle the subject. And finally, to underline the correct verb in parentheses 2 times. So exactly what we did in the previous slide with the sample sentence. Number 1 says the same thing. So you're going to continue this exercise based on the example that we went over together. All right? Good. Now, there's another concept I would like for you to remember from this lesson today. You are going to come across sentences that begin with there or here. However, I want you to know that those words never serve as a subject in a sentence. You're going to basically, if you come across sentences with these words, you're going to eliminate them from the sentences, just like you eliminated those prepositional phrases from the sentences, as to not confuse you, being that you know that they're not subjects, you don't want to concentrate on those two words. So what you would do is look after the verb to find the subject. And we're going to go over some examples together. The first sentence that I want you to direct your attention to says, "Here is water in the desert." Now, we know that here, again, is not a subject, so we would simply cross that out. We also know, based on the rule, that the verb should follow. So we have the verb is. We know that we don't have to pay attention to the prepositional phrase, so we can get rid of in the desert as well. So water is. You notice that the subject as well as the verb is singular. Let's do another example together. There are two sides to every question. Again, we know that there or here is never a subject, so we can get rid of there by simply crossing it out. And we also know that the verb would follow. So in this case, the verb is are. We can get rid of the prepositional phrase to every question because we know that we'd never find a subject or a verb there. And we would identify the subject, in this case, as sides, recognizing that it's plural. So there you have your plural subject accompanied by your plural verb, sides are. Let's see what this would look like on paper. So there you have it. As I said earlier, you'd cross out the words here and there. Then you would ensure that your verbs are underlined twice and your subject once. We're going to be doing exercises together and you're going to be completing them at home that would reinforce this concept. So let's go ahead and look at that at this time. I want you to direct your attention to page 233 once again. And at the very top, we're going to read "Look closely" together and do one or two exercises. Sentences often begin with "there is," or "here are," or "there was," or "here were." That's a mouthful. The words "there" and "here" in such sentences are not the subjects. In sentences beginning with "here" or "there," you must look carefully after the verb for the subject so that you can make the verb agree with it. And we did those examples previously. So in Think B, what it's asking you to do is underline each subject once and the verb in parentheses twice. So looking at number 1, for example, it says there is or are several girls on the committee. Let's follow our process. We would get rid of there because we know it would never serve as a subject. And we would cross out the prepositional phrase "on the committee." So we would only focus on the subject in this case, which would be girls. We recognize that girls is plural, and so it would be girls are. Very good. So you would simply circle the verb, underline the verb in parentheses twice, and then you would underline the subject once. Very good. Go ahead and continue that exercise. It actually goes to page 334, to page 234, excuse me. And now we are on page 234. So you'll notice the rest on the top. And Think C is asking for you to basically fill in the blank with the verbs has or have. So the verb has is singular and have is plural. So you need to identify whether or not the subject in the sentence is singular or plural. Let's look at number 1 together. The first sentence, it says a pin blank ahead, but blank no here. which would be the most appropriate verb to use? If you said has, you are correct. Let's read it in context. A pin has a head, but has no ear. Let's go ahead and do another one together. A clock blank a face, but no mouth there. Yes, a clock has a face, but no mouth there. All right, and you're going to finish the exercises that we went over today on both page 233 and 234. Hopefully you have a good grasp of the concepts. We will continue to practice in the future. Go ahead and have a great day and work independently. Use those smart brains and do well. Bye-bye.